All right, lesson 10. This is going to be a little bit of a longer video, just heads up, but there will be only one today. We're going to be learning about rewriting both fractions and how we do that when we're adding or subtracting. And so we'll just start with this little video and I'll jump in and explain.
How do we write equivalent fractions for both fractions in a problem? So far, we have added fractions with the same denominator or added fractions in which one denominator is a multiple of the other. In this problem, the denominators are not the same, and 2 is not a multiple of 5.
Okay, so like if we were going down that multiplication chart and looking at the multiples of 2, we'd be like 2, 4, 6. Okay, so 5 doesn't fall in there. So now what do we do?
Let's use Cuisenaire rods to see how we can add these fractions. We cannot put the yellow rod and the red rod together to find the sum because we don't know how to name this combination. Is there another rod that could be used to write equivalent fractions for both 1/2 and 1/5? Try a white rod. The white rod represents 1/10 with this hole.
I know we don't have little Cuisenaire rods in front of us, but it's still really good to watch this and visualize how we find equivalent fractions.
So tenths are a common denominator for 1/2 and 1/5. We use 5 1/10 rods to equal the 1/2 rod, and 2 1/10 rods to equal the 1/5 rod. If we put the white rods together, we get 5/10 plus 2/10 is equal to 7/10. So 1/2 plus 1/5 is equal to 7/10. Notice that the common denominator for 1/2 and 1/5, 10, is a multiple of both denominators, 2 and 5.
Okay, this is why we've been doing this practice a lot lately of finding common multiples. So what you're going to do is when we're faced with a problem like this, we need to find the common multiples and then work from there.
Now let's add 1/2 and 1/5 without the Cuisenaire rods. We will use the common denominator 10. Begin with 1/2. To get from a denominator of 2 to a denominator of 10, multiply 2 by 5. Remember to also multiply the numerator by 5.
Okay, remember we have to multiply it by 1 because then it doesn't change its value, but 1 can look a lot of different ways. And so in this case, we're using the number 5 because that's how I get from 2 to 10. And so I would multiply by 5/5. Okay, whatever I multiply my bottom number by, I have to multiply that top number by.
Now, write the equivalent fraction for 1/5. To get from a denominator of 5 to a denominator of 10, multiply 5 by 2. Remember to also multiply the numerator by 2. Now add the equivalent fractions. 5/10 plus 2/10 is equal to 7/10.
Okay, so we just swapped out 1/2 for 5/10. We just changed the fraction so that it looks a little bit different. That way it's easier to add them together. So you find the common denominator, then you multiply the whole fraction by whatever number you need to get to that denominator, and then you can add them together.
So the sum of 1/2 and 1/5 is 7/10. We can also use this method to subtract fractions with different denominators. We will find the difference of 2/3 and 1/2 using the common denominator 6.
Okay, how did we get 6? Well, if I was to look at 2 and 3 and try and find the first common multiple, the least common multiple, because that's the smallest one, and that would be the easiest, I'm going to follow that 2 column, 2, 4, 6, okay? 3, 6. So 6 is my smallest number that is a multiple of both 2 and 3.
Begin with 2/3. To get from a denominator of 3 to a denominator of 6, multiply 3 by 2. Remember to multiply the numerator by 2.
Okay, whatever you do to
Now,
the top, you
write
have
the
to do to the
equivalent
bottom.
fraction for 1/2. To get from a denominator of 2 to a denominator of 6, multiply 2 by 3. Remember to multiply the numerator by 3. Now subtract the equivalent fractions.
Okay, so I'm going to take these fractions that now have the same denominator, and now all I have to do is subtract my numerators. It's much easier to deal with once my denominators match.
4/6 minus 3/6 equals 1/6. Notice that the common denominator for 2/3 and 1/2, 6, is a multiple of both denominators 3 and 2.
One trick you can usually do, unless your numbers are pretty big, is just look at these two denominators and multiply them by each other to get a common multiple. And so in the last case, I think it was 2 and 5. So 2 times 5 is 10, and then we use tenths. Here we have 3 and 2. We can multiply by each other. 3 times 2 is 6. So then I know I can work with 6. That's always one trick that you can do.
Now let's find the...
Okay, so speaking of that, let's look at this. I could look down my multiplication chart and go 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, look all the way down and then see where it matches with 5, 5, 10, 15. Okay, or you could just go, what's 3 times 5? 15. So I know that I can work with 15.
sum of 1/3 and 2/5 without first being told the common denominator. To find a denominator that would
least
work
common
for
multiple.
both 3 and 5, find their first common multiple. The first common multiple for 3 and 5 is 15. Now we need to make equivalent fractions for 1/3 and 2/5 using the common denominator 15. Let's start with 1/3. Because 3 times
Okay, what do I multiply 3 by to get to 15?
5 equals 15, multiply the numerator and denominator by 5. The equivalent fraction is 5/15. Now write an equivalent fraction for 2/5. We want the denominator to be 15, so multiply the numerator and denominator by 3. The equivalent fraction is 6/15.
Now they match. 5/15
Now we can
and
solve the
6/15.
problem by adding the equivalent fractions. 5/15 plus 6/15 equals 11/15. The sum of 1/3 and 2/5 is 11/15.
Okay, really what we're doing, it seems like I remember when I first learned about this, it seemed like I was changing the fraction. But really all you're doing is cutting it into different shaped pieces. And so if I had 1/3 of a pizza, okay, if I'm thinking about that pizza and I cut it into 3 pieces, well, if I decide to cut each of those 3 pieces 5 more times, I'm going to end up with 15 pieces of pizza. But I'm still not changing the amount. I'm just changing the size of the pieces. And so instead of having one piece that's this big, you might have 5 pieces that are this big. Okay, but it's still the same amount. So if I was to draw that, I'm going to try and draw this. This isn't going to be pretty, but I will do my best. Okay, let's stick with the 1/3. Okay, so if I have 1/3, okay, you have this one right here. Let's say you have that whole piece. In order to make it 15ths, all you're doing is you're dividing that piece 5 times. So I'm not changing the amount that I have. I'm just changing the shape of the pieces and the number of pieces. And granted, these should all be the same size, but with this drawing tool, it didn't work super great. So you're not changing how much you have. You're just changing the number of pieces and the shape of those pieces, really.